Hello everyone, Stow's Great War Aerodrome, Ian here, and I bet you can't guess what we're going to talk about today. Zeppelins. Yes, Zeppelins, the very reason the Royal Flying Corps established a base at Stow. You see in front of you a 144th scale Zeppelin model. This one is of Zeppelin L11, a machine that actually survived the war after a career of harrying raids up and down the coast of England. It finished its work around mid-1918 for reasons we'll go into, and it survived the war, which is unusual because a number of the Zeppelins that survived the war were actually scuttled in the latter part of it when the Treaty of Versailles demanded that they be surrendered to the British, American and French forces. There was another one that the Americans were allowed him to build, but essentially those that survived were generally scuttled. This one, however, survived, which is fantastic news. So, while you have a closer look at that, I'm going to tell you a little bit about it. And the first thing we're going to do is show you the scale we're looking at with those little figures on the top, the top gunners. So, let's get some statistics for you. Obviously, the models and the development of the Zeppelins changed throughout the period. They were first designed in reality by our friend Count Ferdinand von Zeppelin in 1893, patented in 1895 and in America in 1899, and the success of this Zeppelin cigar shape is why most airships are this shape now, and why we refer to them as Zeppelins, not just airships. 150 to 250 metres long, depending on what model you're talking about, up to around 42 metres high. Top speed, depending on the wind resistance, between 55 and 75, maybe 80 miles an hour, a real problem for the B-2Es, as an example, that RFC Stow and Goldhanger and Rochford used to combat them. Essentially, the crew of up to 19, maybe in some cases up to 21, but let's not forget the size of these things and the reason they were so big. They were designed as commercial airliners. That's the main reason for the initial designs. In fact, the very first airline for commercial purposes, which I'm not going to try and pronounce the German, but it's essentially DELAG, the German air transport company. That was brought into fruition in 1910, and starting off with pleasure cruises and sightseeing tours, it moved on to scheduled flights in the way we would now perceive a modern airline. And by the time war broke out in 1914, they'd already carried over 10,000 paying passengers on over 1,500 flights. The Zeppelins themselves were split between the Army and the Navy, very specific jobs. It was the Navy that wanted to bomb London for the psychological effects, and of course the rest of the UK. There was 51 raids in total by Zeppelins, and there was 84 Zeppelins built during the Great War, and here's the statistic. 84 built, and 60 of them did not survive. They were either shot down or crashed or were lost at sea or whatever. They dropped over 6,000 pounds of bombs, and they killed nearly 600 people. So while in those numbers there is, in relative terms, when we look at the bombing of the Second World War and subsequent conflicts, there seems to be quite a low accuracy rate and a low death toll, they were still devastating, and also the psychological effect was huge, absolutely huge. So the crew were there for a variety of reasons. There was obviously steering, there was navigation, there was gunners, as you can see on the top there. They were equipped with a variety of things. You can see here one of the protective helmets that was offered to crews. They were terrified of sparks, and so therefore they wouldn't wear metal helmets, and that was an impressive leather one. It's also got cork in there to soften the blow, anything to stop a spark, because this Zeppelin, it isn't one big bag, it's lots of little bags called Blaugas cells. They're filled with hydrogen, hugely flammable gas, and individual cells, and the idea is that if you damage one cell, the other cells around it are unhindered. So a bullet being shot into it will not set this off. That's a common misconception that we see in movies. It's not going to happen in reality. Unless it's an incendiary round, which didn't come in until the latter part of the Great War. The Buckingham and the Martinhail incendiary rounds were effective. But actually, these bags of highly flammable gas, which were made of sausage skin, these bags generally wouldn't explode without an incendiary device, unless you hit the infrastructure. Now, the infrastructure was made of a mixture of aluminium and copper and various other metals called duralumin. but it was basically struts and connections and rivets. You could walk along the entire base of it through gantries and things to inspect all the bags. In fact, here we have a section of the gantry made from that incredibly lightweight aluminium style composite material, copper and aluminium. This is part of the L-48 Zeppelin that was shot down on the evening of 16th and 17th of June 1917. That was shot down by Lieutenant Watkins of 37 Squadron and his gunner, Sergeant Ashby. There was some help from another squadron, but they're the ones who really got the glory for it. These Zeppelins were incredibly impressive things in the sky. They further into the sky than our aircraft could get to. They flew faster, and even though they weren't necessarily armed with huge amounts of weaponry, until their subsequent successors, the Gotha and the Starken bombers came along, they really were a terror in the skies. And psychologically, the propaganda effort surrounding them really cannot be understated. There are colorized photographs and postcards of the time where you have a Zeppelin caught in spotlights on fire, and death of the baby killer is embossed directly beneath it. These were a huge psychological weapon against the residents of the United Kingdom, and it wasn't just London, and we were talking up and down the country, and they were a great propaganda effort because for the Germans they had the great British public on the run in a way that actually the panic and the concerns wouldn't really be seen until the next bombing campaign known as the Blitz, as opposed to the first Blitz, the second Blitz in the Second World War. If you'd like to know more about Zeppelins, come down to Stow and see us. You can get information on the website stowmaries.org.uk. Otherwise, keep up on the YouTube channel, and we'll tell you some more about things as we go forward.